Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Garbaugust, a BookTube event that has been plaguing August for the whole of its torrid length. It was created last year by Ollie at Criminale, designed to celebrate garbage, designed to get us all reading and loving trash. I smiled a lot when the idea came up last year. I was honored to be asked to be a co-host because I've been leavening my reading with trash for the whole of my life, for the whole of my reading life. So it felt natural. And we have double the number of co-hosts this year, and all the bells and whistles. There's merch, there's a bingo card, there's hashtags, and all sorts of things. There are also weekly prompts, which I'm not doing a very good job at, but I am reading a lot of trash. I'm adding a piece of trash to every reading night. And I added one last night that has so much background that we would need to go over. My pick for trash last night to honor an event created by Criminale was picked from the backyard interest of another booktuber, of Michael K. Vaughan. I strayed into his territory. He is, of course, the king of pulps. And I strayed into his territory for what I read last night, which was this. The Solar Invasion by Manly Wade Wellman. This is a Captain Future adventure. I've mentioned Captain Future before. I think I talked about Captain Future in last year's Garbaugust. But when I did, the author's name on the cover was Edmund Hamilton, not Manly Wade Wellman. And I've kind of liked the Captain Future adventure that I read last year. I think that I remember it being basically a Western that had just been lightly adapted to be a space-style shoot-'em-up. The story involves a gorgeous young man named Curtis Newton. He's got brawny muscles and yet a thin waist and lean legs and tangled, tousled red hair, very handsome face. And Manly Wade Wellman tells us over and over again in the story that he wears a skin-tight, sheer green zip-up spacesuit. And I mean over and over again. So much, I don't know anything about Manly Wade Wellman, and like so many figures that I talk about in Garbaugust, I'm pretty sure there's never been an actual mainstream biography of this guy, and even though I bet it would make for interesting reading. I don't know anything about him, but I would be willing to bet that if he was married, his marriage was unhappy, because you don't make that point this many times without something going on of a Freudian nature. Be that as it may, Curtis Newton is just an omnicompetent young superhero, basically. He doesn't have any superpowers, but he does have a superpowered team that he's part of. The Planet Patrol is the broader group that he's part of, but really he's part of the Future Men, a little group inside the Planet Patrol. His particular friends. There's Simon Wright, who is called the Brain because that's all that's left of him. He is a brain in a crystalline box with stalks for eyes and trumpets for ears and all sorts of force fields that he can use to move around. He's just a disembodied brain, since they call him the Brain. There's Grag, who's a gigantic, foul-mouthed Ben Grimm-style robot. There's an android named Otho, who's just sleek. He's handsome, but we're told by Manly Wade Wellman over and over again that he's not as handsome as Captain Future himself. And they also have a little pet named Oog, who is a shapeshifter. He's a small shape-shifting creature that this came out in the 1940s, I think, this book did. So probably someone read this and then, actually Otto Binder knew this guy. He knew Manly Wade Wellman. So probably that's where Otto Binder got the idea for Protty, Chameleon Boy's little shape-shifting pet in the Legion of Superheroes 55 years later. Anyway, let's not get distracted too much because we've got a lot of ground to go over here before we even get to the book. And I'm going to refer you to Michael K. Vaughan. He is going to know this story better than anybody. He's going to know the details of it much better than I am. But Captain Future was a hit and had his own magazine. And you have to trace the chain of custody of this character. I say that Manly Wade Wellman is the author of this book, but he wasn't. He was the author of a serial adventure story for Captain Future in Captain Future magazine, but the magazine got canceled. So I don't think Manly Wade Wellman ever saw The Solar Invasion as a book, as the thing that I'm holding in my hand. I don't know that he ever did. It eventually was collected into a book. But I mentioned that the writer who did a lot of Captain Future stories was Edmund Hamilton. He's the only author I know associated with this character because he's the only other Captain Future adventure that I've read was written by him. But he didn't invent Captain Future any more than he invented the magazine, I guess. I think that Captain Future was invented by Mort Weisinger, who's a well-known name to me. I'm pretty sure that either Mort Weisinger or Otto Binder invented this character. It's not much to do with inventing, but the idea of the Future Men is clever. Whoever came up with that idea ought to be credited. Not that anybody, these guys probably remember themselves. They probably don't know. The origins of all of this stuff is probably literally lost in the mists of time. I think Mort Weisinger probably came up with this character. Certainly, I am more familiar with both Mort Weisinger and Edmund Hamilton from their comic book writing than I am from any science fiction or fantasy pulp stories. But it doesn't matter where the character comes from. Manly Wade Wellman jumps in here to write the story of a strapping, astonishingly good-looking, muscular young man in a skin-tight suit that's really shiny. And here they have to face an invader, an invasion force. Eventually, in the course of the novel, moves really fast. This is pulpy writing, as Michael K. Vaughan will tell you. Pulpy writing really moves fast. It had to. If it didn't catch your interest, you would dump it and you'd never pick up that magazine again. And there were 50 other magazines at the newsstand. So it's not like you had only one pulp magazine to choose from. There were 50. If you read even one thing in that issue that you didn't like, you'd drop it, you'd never pick it up again. So these writers had to earn their keep. They had to keep you interested. And they do. They absolutely do. So I'm not saying that this is not, that you should avoid this as a reading experience. It is trash. I just don't want to say that too much because I don't want any pained howls coming out from stately Vaughan Manor. But in the course of the novel, it doesn't take long for it to happen. Our heroes become aware of the fact that something very strange is happening and that it might be connected with an invasion force from a very strange dimension. Do you know how I know that it's a strange dimension? Because the name that Manly Wade Wellman comes up for to name it is the Strange Dimension. Now, that's only partially a facade. Sooner or later, we are going to get to the main villain in this book, and he tends to be the main villain in Captain Future novels. But I want to read you the beginning here. Now, this came out in the 1940s, and it was never really a book to start with, and I doubt that Manly Wade Wellman ever had the copyright to it. So I don't really know. I don't really know that I'm in any kind of a danger here in reading a chunk of chapter 1. I want to give you the flavor for this thing, but I don't think I'm in any danger from the copyright police. Who knows who owns the copyright to Captain Future? Who knows? You could make a really interesting science fiction serial, comic book, or even movie out of this. The Future Men are a little bit clunky in their current design, but imagine what a contemporary imagination could do to it. How a contemporary imagination could fix them up. A disembodied brain, an android, a giant robot, and a himbo dreamboat character. There's a lot that could be done there. But I want to read you just a bit of the scene here. The novel opens with our characters on an asteroid having a steak. Captain Future is cooking a steak for himself. His colleagues don't. The brain doesn't eat. The robot is not with them at the moment. The android has little chemical cubes. He thinks it's barbaric, the idea of eating a steak. We're told that the asteroid is very, very, very small, but that somehow it has enough gravity so that it has an atmosphere and whatnot. It's okay, if you want to say so. There are actually laws that govern that, but you're writing science fiction. Why should you bother? But I want to read you a scene here. They are hiding out from the Earth government because the Earth government wants to give them all medals. And one character points out that not only would that be embarrassing and really cheesy, but also it would be counterproductive. The Future Men rely on the fact that most of the nefarious elements in the galaxy can't pick them out of a police lineup, don't know what they look like, specifically because they avoid the spotlight. And here these people want to pin awards on them. So one of them says, "Why can't the system government see that a big ceremony and reception for us would be bad?" inquired Otho. "We do our best work because we're not too well known by sight. If the whole system saw us on television, it would ruin our effectiveness." He nibbled more chemical cake. "I'd look silly wearing a system medal for distinction." "Then what's that you're wearing?" inquired the brain, dropping down a couple of feet to peer. Otho glanced down and gasped. On the chest of his zipper suit hung a broad, glistening piece of jewelry, a 10-pointed star, inches across, jeweled and enameled and inscribed in 5 planetary languages. The system medal, cried Kurt. Well, Otho, I thought you wanted to steer clear of all decorations. Where did it come from? Otho clawed at the magnificent creation. It dropped from him like a fruit from a tree, bounced on the floor of the grotto, shook itself, and flowingly shifted shape, and changed into Oog, who stared solemnly at his master. I guess Oog has a face. And somehow Oog knows the written versions of 5 planetary languages. Oog had just been exercising the meteor mimic faculty of changing himself into anything. The little imp, cried Otho. He's beginning to understand our talk. By gosh, he can imitate anything. He can imitate the writing of the 5 planetary languages. I'd be willing to bet Otho can't do that. Amazing, agreed the brain. Well, here we are anyway, quietly picnicking. No fuss, no decorations. He closed the jaws of his resonator with an emphatic snap. The difficulty is, resumed Kurt, finishing his sandwich, the solar system thinks its major troubles are over, and we can think of retiring. It's my experience that when everything seems smoothest, danger threatens in its most deadly form. I wish President Carthew and his cabinet would realize that. Grag's back on the moon, the brain reminded him. Maybe they'll go there and give him all the glory. Grag, blah, snorted Otho. That big heap of junk. Those tin brains of his don't realize what a bore it would be. Another interesting thing that you could exploit. The android doesn't like the robot. The synthezoid of synthetic flesh doesn't like the metal creation, and the feeling's mutual. It'd be very interesting to do. I don't know what the future of the future men are. I don't know what anybody's ever done with Captain Future. He broke off, staring at Oog. The meteor mimic had again melted, stirred his cells, and now stood up in the form of a little metal dwarf, sturdily made, with jointed limbs, bulbous head, and a tiny photoelectric eyes. He's mimicking Grag, except that Grag's 7 feet tall, cried Otho. I told you that Oog is getting smart. Oog melted himself yet again and shaped his substance into a little square box, transparent, with flexible eye stalks. He's now imitating the brain. Now he's the brain, said Kurt with a laugh. He understands a lot. Otho? This last shift means that he agrees with you about his smartness. He put out the fire and relaxed against the wall of the grotto. We're out of sight of the comet, that's their ship, parked out yonder, he mused. Even if they signal the comet, we don't know it, so our conscience will be free. Look at Oog, said the brain suddenly. He senses something. Perched on Otho's knee, Oog was undergoing another shift of shape. His doughty body had slimmed out in one place, curved at another, and altered into a tiny living statuette of a young woman, slender and vigorous, in a silken space jacket and slacks, with rippling black hair and a face of flawless beauty. Little too late for that now, Manly. Holy sun imps, cried Captain Future. It's Joan Randall. No, it isn't, came a silvery voice from outside the grotto. It's only an imitation of the genuine article. Joan Randall is right here. She's another agent of the planetary police. Otho and Kurt got to their feet as Joan Randall entered the grotto. The brain doesn't get to his feet because he doesn't have any feet. Otho and Kurt got to their feet as Joan Randall entered the grotto. Lovely, intelligent, brave, she was one of Hulk Anders' best Secret Service agents in the Planetary Patrol Department. Again and again she had done splendid service as a lieutenant of Captain Future, whom she loved very devotedly. All right, so we've been tracked to our hiding place, groaned the big, red-haired chief of the Futuremen. How did you find us, Joan? Not at all hard to do, said she. They fired one red warning torpedo into these latitudes, but you didn't give any response. So they fired another, with a follower beam on it to chart its course, and I jumped in a speedy racer rocket and came along. She smiled dazzlingly and went on. So here I am. That's womanly intuition, observed Otho, cuddling Oog. How does it feel to have it used on you, Kurt? I might point out, that wasn't intuition. That was called deduction. I can remember also what it means, said the brain, laughing. Women are marvelous creatures. Yeah, you've got synthetic eye stalks and synthetic ear trumpets, but you don't have a synthetic woo-woo, if you know what I mean. Welcome, Joan, said Captain Future. Sit down, and I'll broil you a steak, the finest steak you ever dreamed of. Such a delicious bribe certainly ought to keep you from betraying our refuge out of sheer gratitude. This isn't a question of gratitude, Joan retorted. You're wanted badly at headquarters. Ezra Gurney wants you to report in at once. He's only a marshal, said Kurt. We can ignore him. He grinned at the pretty girl. They've got Grag. Isn't that one Futureman enough for President Carthew to pin medals on? That's not the trouble, said Joan in tones that were very deeply worried. We can't find Grag. What do you mean? Kurt Newton was frankly astonished. We left Greg at our laboratory to look after things and make a check on some experiments he was conducting. I'm sure Greg would never leave while on duty. Please, cried Joan Randall so desperately that they all fell silent and stared at her. You have to give me a chance to tell you what it is that made me follow you here. All I was saying, finished Kurt rather sadly, was that Greg wouldn't go away from the moon. That's just it, said Joan. We can't find the moon either. And once again, somewhere in stately Vaughn Manor, Michael K. Vaughn is saying, "Don't stop there." I want to point out two things about that passage before I give. I don't need to go on at length about the solar invasion. I want to point out two things. One is that the flavor that you get there. Well, actually, I should point out the negative first. I want to draw your attention to something you almost certainly already noticed, which is the way they talk about Oog is exactly the way they talk about Joan Randall. That sooner or later, if we keep talking, they might achieve sentience. A little bit of the time, I think, but also maybe a little bit of Manly Wade Wellman. But it's not just that. I also want to point out something that I mentioned already. Here you've had an example of it. You don't want to stop reading. As cheesy, as garbagey as it is, you don't want to stop reading. And you don't in the whole course of this book. There are thrills. There are hair-split turns. There are cliffhangers that would probably have been very effective in the magazine. You would certainly, if you'd read one of these things, and you were only going to get the next one next week, you would have come back. But was not to be. So that is my Garbaugust trash pile for today. It is the Solar Invasion, another Captain Future adventure. I guess I'm going to do one of these in every Garbaugust, but only one. I'm only going to do one. It's a tiny little thing. I was lucky to find it in an old vintage paperback. Once again, the paperback held up perfectly. Only barely a little bit of detachment happening on the back, between the back cover and the text block, but not much. This could stand another read, but it is never going to get. So I will put this away, and we'll see what I pick next time, and I will report back. Thank you, BookTube.